welcome again to this last panel on the insurance capital standard. The MC has already introduced the panel. I'm very honored to have my two vice chairs on EXCO, David Altmaier, Commissioner from Florida, Shiguro Arizumi, JFSA, and also Petra Hilkama, Chair of EIOPA. So with that, I will hand over to Romain Passereau, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the IAIS, and he's going to take us through and give us updates on what is happening on this project. Romain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy and very pleased to provide an update on the ICS, the Insurance Capital Standard, in the ICS, this incredible city of Santiago. I will start by saying that we are nearing the end of the third year of the monitoring period of the ICS. As you know, the monitoring period was designed to assess the performance of the ICS over a sufficient period of time through confidential reporting, engagement with volunteer groups, and feedback from colleges of supervisors. As such, these first 3 years were a period of stability for the reference ICS, where we made only limited changes to the specifications just to address fatal flaws or unintended consequences. We are now finalizing our review of this year's results and the feedback that we have received. One important area of our work has been the market-adjusted valuation, for which we have collected supplementary information about the potential impact of some changes to the specification, to the three-bucket approach. In particular, we collected an alternative balance sheet that included a term structure approach to the spreads, a partial recognition of non-fixed assets in the spread calculation, and a modulation factor to reduce overshooting effects. And we are currently analyzing these results. This year, we also collected additional information for the review of the calibration of some risk factors. Also this year, we hosted a virtual ICS Global Roundtable of Supervisors, which brought together home and host supervisors of internationally active insurance groups to discuss their experiences with assessing the performance of the ICS and providing a feedback beyond the one that we have been collecting every year of the monitoring period. Over these 3 years, I'm also happy to say that we have welcomed new volunteers in the exercise, and this year was also the case. All of this work will come together next year with our planned public consultation on the ICS as a prescribed capital requirement. This will be a large consultation covering all potential revisions to the ICS as we know it, and decision with regard to the additional reporting elements, i.e. decision on whether ICS as a PCR will feature a gap plus valuation methodology, and whether other methods of calculation of the ICS capital requirement, such as internal models, will be allowed. Work is ongoing on these topics, so we are in a position to make recommendations and seek feedback through the consultation. At the same time as the ICS consultation, we will also launch a consultation on revisions to the ICP 14 valuation and ICP 17 capital adequacy, which form the foundation of the ICS and will also benefit from all the work that has been put into the ICS. Work on these ICPs is also ongoing and solid progress has been made. The draft ICS as a PCR that will be consulted upon next year will also form the basis for the next year ICS data collection and for the ICS economic impact assessment, which the IAIS has committed to conduct prior to the adoption of the ICS as a PCR. On this point, I would like to mention that we have scheduled a public stakeholder event on December 15 to collect views on the scope of this exercise. Finally, I would like to provide an update on the aggregation method comparability assessment project. In response to the comments from stakeholders on the draft criteria that we have received, the IAIS has communicated that it has decided to provide additional opportunity for stakeholder engagement on the development of the scenarios that will be used to inform the comparability assessment. These engagements have already begun last month and will continue, particularly with this stakeholder meeting that I mentioned that will take place in Tampa on the 15th of December, and registration have opened on our website. In light of the importance of taking into account the design of these scenarios in finalizing the comparability criteria, the IAIS has also decided to move consideration of the final criteria from this month to our meeting in March 2023, where both criteria and scenarios will be considered together. This change in the timeline will help strengthen alignment between the criteria and the design of the scenarios. However, it will not impact the timing of the actual IAM comparability assessment, which is scheduled to begin in the second half of 2023. And before concluding my remarks, I would like, of course, to thank our members of the CSFWG, for their very active work, and for the volunteers also for their contribution to this, to the data collection. And now I can hand over to you, Vicky, for this panel. I'm very much looking forward to listen to.
Thank you very much, Romain. So next, I'm going to ask the panel members to give us some updates on how they plan to implement ICS in the various jurisdictions, given the fact that we're going to be issuing a consultation next year of ICS as PCR, and obviously we're going to be doing also the economic impact assessment as well on the basis of that consultation paper. You know, we are planning to finish the ICS by 2024, so we have already started thinking about what next. And what next, of course, will be at a particular point in time, we will start doing implementation assessments of various jurisdictions. We may or may not combine it with the whole of ComFrame, because obviously it's jurisdictions that have internationally active insurance groups that will be relevant for ComFrame. And as part of that, it's quite important to start the discussion of how different jurisdictions, in anticipation of all of this, are actually thinking about implementing or converging towards the ICS in the years to come. And with that introduction, I will pass to Shiguru.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you, Vicky. Yes, I think I shared some of our experiences and thinking at Croatia. So maybe I'll briefly talk about that first and provide you with some updates and some personal thoughts about the ICS. As you may know, Japan is fully supports the ICS, and we are looking to implement the ICS standards and domestic implementation of ICS standards as scheduled right now. And we have issued a preliminary paper which outlines the Japanese position right now on this last June. And in the preliminary paper, we have had an intensive dialogue with the industry, and that is not only to familiarize the industry with what ICS is all about, but also to for us to understand where the industry is in terms of how they are transitioning during the monitoring period for the actual application of the ICS standards in the Japanese jurisdiction. So our plenary paper focuses basically on Pillar 1 issues. And of course, because the ICS is mainly for IAIGs, we will make adjustments, especially in line with the proportionality principles in our actual domestic, when we introduce the domestic regulations. So that's where we are right now. We are discussing with industry about Pillar 2 and Pillar 3. Which is obviously for me is actually as important as Pillar 1. On Pillar 1, we are talking about discount rates, internal models, validations, and so forth. But we'll continue to work on that, but also work on Pillar 2 and Pillar 3 aspects. And I think conversation and dialogue with the industry in that respect is also very important. And in line with what the IAIS is doing in the context of economic impact assessment, we are having initial informal conversation with the industry about how the transition will actually affect their business model, for example, or their product lines, and also their asset management. So we want to make sure that the transition will be smooth in that context. And I think, of course, when we discuss about ICS, the main focus is, and it's evident and it's natural that it will be on Pillar 1. But of course, whatever figures do come out of Pillar 1, we also need to be very mindful about what the figure does actually mean, because we need to take into account what the company's business profiles are, for example, what the market situation could be at that point in time. So we want to take a more comprehensive approach. We will look at numbers, of course, but we need to also understand what is actually happening on the ground for the companies in real life. So that's, I think, will be important moving forward. And I think that's in that context, I think the conversation or the dialogue between the regulators and the industry would be very important to have a smooth transition to the ICS, which would benefit not only the regulators and supervisors, but we believe the industry as a whole. So let me stop there. Thank you.
What lessons for the ICS from the Solvency II review the EU is undertaking? Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Vicky. And naturally, building an ICS is with all the input from the volunteers, and thank you very much for that. It's really important that you contribute, and you do, so thanks for that. If that wasn't enough, we also have to do an economic impact assessment, and I think it's very important that we do that. I think any policy developed always needs to consider once you have a picture of what it would probably look like, is it actually going to achieve what it's supposed to achieve, and at what cost? And is that then still efficient, and is it effective? We are currently discussing in the IAIS how we want to build that, and we still need to discuss that. So I think that is maybe something for next panel, in a next conference. But what I can share here is how we did that for Solvency II, because in 2020 we did an economic impact assessment for the Solvency II review. And what did we do? Well, what we did was we did a holistic impact assessment, and we did a detailed impact assessment. When we say holistic impact assessment, what I mean is that we made a comprehensive overview of the combined impact of all proposed legal changes in all areas. So it's really like the whole package as one, and then we ask the question, is it reaching the objectives, and what are the expected costs? And in order to do this analysis, of course, we had to reach out and do several info requests in order to get there. The second part that then was added to the comprehensive approach was a detailed impact assessment. And there we would dive into each individual policy area, and we would do a granular check, both quantitative and qualitative, of the costs and benefits for policyholders, for supervisors, and for industry. And that together then would give an outcome where in this particular part, in the detailed part, we would look at the impact on policy objectives, and again, are we reaching what we want to reach? But we would also make a comparison of the options in terms of effectiveness and efficiency. And if I say effectiveness, I mean the degree to which it actually is meeting the objectives again, and when I say efficiency, we would look at what are the costs of that. And that whole package then leads to a result where you could say, this is what it does for policyholder protection, this is what it does for financial stability, and this is what it does for the functioning of the markets. And I think that when we develop at the IAIS our economic impact assessment, that these are steps where we have to go through. I also think that because we have so much data from the volunteers, we should really start with the data we already have and then see what we need to add to it. But I do think we have a wealth of information that a lot of what we need to do could be done with the data already available. Not saying that we don't need to reach out a little bit. Now, when it comes to this effectiveness and does it reach the policy objectives, I think it is key that we understand what are the policy objectives. And here, I would say in the case of Solvency II in Europe, but I would not expect that it would be completely different. But what we said is have policyholder protection, financial stability, functioning of markets. And if we make that more concrete, we said we want to improve the functioning of the market. We want to ensure sound, effective, and a consistent level of regulation and supervision. We want integrity and transparency. And we want to prevent regulatory arbitrage. We want to promote appropriate risk-taking, and we want to protect consumers. And that was the objectives, and that is what we then assessed to. And also here, I think it would be really helpful if the IAIS also from the outset identifies what are the goals, what are the principles we want to say these are the objectives, but I think with the ICP core principles, we have material that we can use, and we do not necessarily need to develop something new. But this is what I can say about the exercise in Europe.
Thanks very much, Petra. Very interesting. And as you say, with the ICS, we did set out the objectives to begin with, and the principles, so we have to return to them as part of the impact assessment, which we're still sort of, actually on Tuesday we did have a first discussion on the scope, and as Romain said, there will be we'll be reaching already out to stakeholders for views on scope on the 15th of December, which will then feed into a finalisation of the scope. I have been asked as well to say a few things about, I beg your pardon, about the review that we are doing of our solvency framework in the UK. The starting point is effectively identical to the Solvency II framework we had when we were a member of the EU. So effectively the areas that we are reforming are the areas where we thought that the EU-wide Solvency II regime did not completely 100% fit particular aspects of the UK market, but overall, the Solvency II regime we think is a good regime. and we're going to be maintaining most of its features, its underlying structure, the confidence levels, most of the calibrations, etc. So the areas that we are reforming are areas of simplification, for example, on reporting, where we have quite a lot of our own national templates, given the particular market, on top of some of the Solvency II reporting templates that not all of which are actually used actively by our supervisors. So we're going to be dropping some of those. And we already actually consulted on the first batch, and we're going to be doing more going forward. Areas of speeding up the various approvals, again, because there was some hurdles that in practice we did not consider them particularly useful, so we would gain some operational efficiency. And then in terms of the standards, we always had some issue about the volatility of the risk margin, particularly in low rate environments. Now, of course, we have a high rate environment, but we are going to be reforming the risk margin so that it's not so high in low risk environment, which is something that we had argued when we were members of the EU. And we also are looking at the matching adjustment, which is the equivalent of bucket 1 in the ICS framework, and which is something that our firms have in the UK, because of the type of annuity products they sell, use quite extensively. And we are going to be looking at how appropriate this is, and coming up with a supervisory approach that reflects the risks. We are doing all of that with an eye to be completely compliant with the ICS when it comes out for internationally active insurance groups. We have already checked the compliance for that, and we have as a strategy in the UK overall that we want to be compliant for our internationally active firms with international standards, because indeed we think this is the way to maintain the competitiveness of a large financial centre like the UK. Compliance with international standards is key for both policyholder protection, financial stability, but ultimately long-term competitiveness. So that is very much part of what we do, and obviously when the standard is finalized, we're going to be checking over a period of 3 or 4 years, we will have complete control of the rules within the PRA. We don't at the moment. Some of them sit with Parliament because of the way they've got transferred from the EU institutions to UK institutions, and we should be able to make any changes at that point. Thanks. And now going to David, who's going to provide an update on the development of the aggregation method. Romain spoke about that, very much in the work plan to assess whether the aggregation method provides outcome equivalent results with the ICS, and if it does, that would be terrific. So, David, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Well, thank you. And so appreciate the opportunity to be up here. Just, a quick word about the scarf. I see a lot of you looking at me funny, and it just, the AEM has been a little bit contentious, and so I thought if I say something off script between Vicky and Sugar, they can just grab an end and pull, and I'll get back onto the talking points. So it's actually a practical statement, more so than a fashion statement. But not a whole lot to update beyond what Romain has already said in his opening speech. Was probably the most impactful update since our talk in Dubrovnik. But just by way of background, we started working on the AEM method back in 2017, and that work has culminated in a provisional version of the aggregation method, which we've described in what we're characterizing as a level 1 document that we've got out there in the universe somewhere. For those, I'm sure most of you have looked at that. But that's currently undergoing further testing during a data collection that's got the same timing as the ICS monitoring period. So just, again, by way of background, the AEM is designed to leverage already proven legal entity reported, available, and required capital to produce a measure of group capital adequacy. So it's going to provide a group lens on solvency while maintaining those legal entity building blocks and allow supervisors to analyze and identify and address capital deficiencies where they reside. Data for the 2022 aggregation method data collection was due on August the 31st, and it's currently being reviewed. We got data from 21 AEM volunteers from 5 different countries. We expanded this year's data collection to include testing of potential comparability data for use in the assessment of whether the AEM provides comparable outcomes to the ICS. And as in the KL agreement, if deemed comparable, the AEM will be considered an outcome equivalent approach for implementation of the ICS as a prescribed capital requirement. In addition to the provisional AEM, a range of methodologies for scaling and calibrating the AEM are being tested. And a final version of the aggregation method is going to be decided upon by the end of the ICS monitoring period, and it's going to consider both the results of the AEM data collection and the IAIS's comparability assessment. And as Romain has already said, we thought it was important to move back the publication of the criteria until March to allow the opportunity to look at the scenarios along with that. But as Ramon has already said, that's not going to impact the overall timeline of the AEM or the comparability assessment. So that's the update on the AEM.
Fantastic, David. Thank you very much. And now opening the floor for questions. Jonathan is going to moderate.
See any opening up for questions? Any questions for the panel? Scanning the room. Can I believe that on a panel on ICS there are no questions? Maybe it is possible that you already know everything there is to know about ICS, because it has been a very long journey to date. But if there are any questions about the implementation of ICS, that might be good, because this is in a sense, the new focus. Steve.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll take the bait. Steve Brody from the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. We greatly appreciate the delay in the work on or I shouldn't say delay, but the additional time that the IAIS has taken for the review of the detailed criteria, and in particular the expanded opportunities for stakeholder engagement that you've given us. We will participate for sure in the stakeholder session in Tampa in December, and we were just wondering if you could give us a little additional information on your registration form. Said that the IAIS would be sending questions around to stakeholders before the Tampa meeting, and we were just wondering if there was sort of any preview that we could get of the what those questions will look like.
Do you want to bring the microphone here, perhaps, and I shall hand over to Roman.
So it's in the making, so they should be out very soon. We are polishing them, so they are perfect.
Watch this space. Watch this space.
But participants will have them
Yes.
at least a week and probably
Yes,
more
absolutely,
longer
absolutely.
before the 15th
Yeah,
of December.
absolutely.
And it's a fair question. I must say, we are really looking for concrete feedback. I mean, that's why we have responded to the feedback, because we really, really encourage you to give us concrete feedback. The area we're so keen about is on scenarios in particular, under high-level principle 1.
Very good. Any other questions? Petra.
Maybe setting up a little bit of my, I'm a supervisor tone, but just to say why it is so important that we have a really good discussion in Tampa. It is that, and we listen to industry, we said, you indicated you want to give feedback, we read your feedback, we appreciated that feedback, and in that feedback you said, we cannot write everything down on the basis of your question. We need to have meetings, we need to have workshops, we need to have interactions. And we listened to that, and we had a discussion, and we decided then that scenarios come later, and then we had to take another decision. What then do we do with the criteria? So I think we carefully listened. Now, there was a workshop, and what I was told was that it was a very good workshop, and then after that we would receive some texts. Now, I'll be very open. The text, the written text that we got was not as nice as we liked the workshop. And that's because much of it was just a reflection of what we already got during the consultation. Now, really appreciate, we're all busy, so sometimes that happens. But now we do have some time going towards Tampa. So while the Secretariat is drafting the questions and will give you at least a week to respond to that, I think already during that workshop itself, good things happened. However, the feedback in writing after that did not fully reflect that. So I think if you say, I want to start working tomorrow, super, but then that could be a start, because I think the workshop itself is very valuable, and I thank you all for that, but let's build on that, because we do need that input.
Thanks, Petra. Good. There we go. Hugh. Can always rely on you, Hugh.
I didn't want to disappoint you at the end of the day. I was just... When you do the consultation in the summer, presumably it's going to be talking about content and design as well, features on the final version. To what extent, coming back to your point on implementation, will it be looking about what does a PCR mean in practice? So, I mean, I know we talked about that briefly in Dubrovnik in the summer, that, you know, how does that process work on the PCR, particularly where you have jurisdictions like you'll have in Japan and others where you'll have your version or you'll have something complied. Vicky's mentioned about wanting to have something comparable or consistent in the UK context. I'm sure Japan, Europe will be looking at that. Is that going to go into that detail as well at the consultation? What does it mean in practice in terms of implementation at a local level?
Thanks, Hugh. I mean, and Romain should correct me or indeed complement in what I was what I'm going to say. But the consultation, which is not the final proposal, the final proposal will be after the consultation. And we're giving 90 days for that, and obviously we will have the impact assessment as well, is going to be on the design of the ICS. So focus on what we've learned from the 4 years of monitoring period. There's going to be a 5th year as well before we finalise in terms of how we want to change the design from what we've learned and also from colleges, all the stakeholder input, the workshops in this 4-year period. As Romain said, there's also going to be a revision. I mean, the definition of what a PCR is in the ICPs and in ICP 17. Basically, I can't remember the exact wording, but it says something like, if it gets breached, there needs to be supervisory action. So that is the definition of what it is. As Romain said, we're also going to be the ICP 17 on capital adequacy and ICP 14 on valuation are going to be reviewed. And we're also going to be consulting on those because they need to be consistent with where we come up with the ICS. But the PCR, what it means is that you'd expect a supervisory response if it gets breached, which is, of course, the reason why when we developed the definition for comparability, we looked at this particular ICP and we said that we are expecting a similar response from the breach of those jurisdictions that decide to implement the ICS via an aggregation method. We would expect that the supervisory response is similar in nature. So that's in the definition, and then the criteria would test a particular jurisdiction's implementation or whether this indeed happens in practice, given where we are. So that's what it is. And then the way that we intend to assess whether in the future, after 2024, how particular jurisdictions are going to be implementing ICS is through an implementation assessment, which, as I mentioned earlier, could be done as part of the whole of the ComFrame standards, with ICS being the quantitative pillar, or just the ICS, and it depends on resourcing, timing, and decisions. But that's the strategy. Thanks. Is that? It's apparently perfect. Good. So please.
Very good. Just scanning up. There we go. Peter at the back there.
Hi, thank you. I'm Peter Duran from AIA. I have a very practical question and request, which is the Tampa meeting sounds like it's going to be very key, and I'm wondering whether you plan to have access to that online. And if the answer is no, then would you please reconsider?
Romain?
Well, do you want to come here?
Unfortunately, we have been looking at the possibility of having a hybrid event, but I believe that in terms of the technical equipment that we need, it will not be available. So for the moment, we can continue to explore that, because I understand that there's a desire to offer the possibility of a hybrid meeting, but for the moment, it seems that it's not possible to do that in Tampa. We also we are looking at the possibility to host two other stakeholder events, one in Asia and one in Europe, and that's also something we are working on.
But Tampa is a wonderful part of Florida, so you should certainly feel free to come.
I'm actually considering going myself.
Yoshi, did you want to ask?
It's something we could explore, yeah.
Just Jonathan invited us for implementation, and Vicky, you explained implementation side. So maybe you have explained us, maybe you can explain us a little bit more detail if you have any plan for 2025 kickoff, and then implementation starts. And for example, now assessment group of IAIS have a lot of exercise for ICPs. So my question to you, how do you start, or when do you plan to start this, assessment exercise by IAIS about ICS?
Happy to take that. It might be a short answer, in that this question hasn't been fully discussed yet within the IAIS. I mean, I would say generally we recognize that when we finalize a standard like this quantitative ComFrame standard, it is best to allow some time for our members to implement that. So I think I can say with some certainty that implementation assessment would not start on the 2nd of January 2025. But exactly when it would be started, we will discuss that over the next year or two. Thanks.
Yes, and I mean this is actually right. We have just started discussing these issues, and obviously we will need to balance the actual implementation assessments with the other work that we're doing on implementation in Peter Brown-Muller's group, including the member assessment ones, which look deeply into the ICPs. So we've discussed a little bit that, but we will need to develop it. One other area which is related to implementation, which we have not discussed, but we will need to discuss, is transitionals. And that is also something and obviously the impact assessments, what we have collected from the monitoring period, which will form, as Petra said, the bulk of the quantitative bits of the impact assessment, elements of the impact assessment will be quite useful.
Good. I think we have time for one more question. Helena.
I still don't have my voice, but I will try. I was wondering whether there is any decision or decisions in the making regarding the ultimate vision, because for the aggregation approach, which is an amalgamation of local regimes, presumably like you could maintain local regimes and then have this group view through the aggregation method. Fine. But if there are regimes like Solvency II, or frankly OSFI, Canada, which have consolidated group risk-based requirements, so what's the vision for such regimes with respect to ICS? Like, will European companies be subject to two regimes? Like, how is it to work? Because there's Solvency II and there will be ICS. It will not be one and the same, or will it?
I will pass on to Petra on this, and ultimately, if there's a need for legislation change in Europe, it will be the Commission, but that will have to undertake it. But I'll pass on to Petra. For the UK, we are already, now that we are reviewing, we are already checking with the current ICS version 2.0, whether for the internationally active insurance groups, whether the regime is compliant. That is, whether we would be deemed to meet ICS in terms of the regime, and if we don't in the future, we will make some changes to try to do that. So that's our plan. Petra?
Yes, thanks, Vicky. And I think like what Vicky is doing in her jurisdiction, also at the EU, we constantly keep track of where we are with ICS and how it compares to not only the current Solvency II, but also the Solvency II that is under review and that will likely to have some changes to it. But I think overall, we're quite comfortable that it will be ICS compliant. In fact, if you're looking for a volunteer on the 2nd of January 2025, Jonathan. So, no, but that's how confident I am. But it is because we constantly monitor and we look into it. And the idea is definitely not that IAIGs would have to comply with two different requirements. The idea is that it falls together, and where Vicky can say we will make changes, I have to say we will ask the Commission to make changes if that really would be necessary. But so far, I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, and I think probably reflecting that this is actually pretty much the case for any of our standards. So ICS is one of the global standards, but then of course it's up to each jurisdiction to implement that through their legislation, through their regulatory requirements, in a way that meets the standards. And of course, the ICS is being developed as a minimum global standard, and jurisdictions would look to implement something that is at least as prudent as the ICS. Well, very good. We are right on time, so please join me in a very big round of applause for our last panel. Thank you.